Divine Truth Assistance Group. Group assistance session putting principles of divine truth into action. This recording is from the Developing My Will to Love group and is part of the Education in Love series. In the Facing My Resistance to Faith Q&A presentation, Jesus answers questions from the audience about the material covered in the previous presentation, Facing My Resistance to Faith, recorded on the 23rd of February 2016 in Noosaville, Queensland, Australia.
Bit of Johnny Cash there. Did any of you know you had that song? What is Truth? It's a good song. Lonely voice of youth cries, what is truth? Yeah, well, see, as a child, it's just like you get told one thing one moment, one thing another moment, depending on who's going to get, have to feel something at the time, and before you know it, you've got no idea what the hell's going on. And then we wonder why, as adults, we're confused, and we don't know how to act, and we don't know how to feel, and we don't know how to think, and we don't... Lonely voice of youth cries, what is truth? Okay. Well, now we come to the Q&As on those two subjects that we just presented before the break. And what I'd like to do is focus the first half an hour on the faith Q&A. So anything to do with facing my resistance to faith or facing my lack of faith, would like to cover first, and then half an hour in, we'll switch it over to the issue about God's truth, resistance to God's truth. So it's up to you now to whatever you'd like to ask about faith. Let's focus on that quality. Rita?
So I'm not sure if that belongs to here, but for me it's what I learned as a child and as a teenager about what faith and the holy, the saints and also as mystics, what I read and what they do, and some inspired me and some put me really off. Mm-hmm. Also I have fear, or I don't want to connect to God because I'm like that.
Yeah.
I'm yearning for God like for a lover. I mean, it's bad enough you learn for a physical lover, yeah? Mm-hmm. Then, so does that have anything to do with that resistance? Or is it a...
you're pretty hooked on this learning for God as a lover thing, aren't you? Yeah. And I feel it's something you do need to resolve. God's not your lover because God's provided your lover, which is the other half of yourself. And I feel a lot of people who yearn for God as a lover are actually avoiding a lot of their soulmate emotions. And so I feel that's a different subject altogether.
I just must say, I checked in the internet and Teresa von Avila yearned for Jesus as a lover. So that's completely off anyway. But I believed that whole stuff.
I know people do that. And to be frank, I find it pretty repulsive. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. Yeah. If we go up to back there, to Janine.
I just realised today that when I want something like so much...
I can't hear Joellen very well.
Sorry.
Is that because can you put the mic a bit closer?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, that's much better. Yeah.
I just realised today that when I really want something, when I want it so much, I have an automatic default into believing that there's something wrong with wanting it.
Yes.
So is that a lack of faith in myself, in my own knowing of what I want, or is it a lack of faith in God, or is it both?
Well, I feel it's a inability to determine what is love and what is not. So more than anything else, because the reality is you can long for something, and you can have faith in something, but it can actually be bad. You follow?
Yes.
And you can also long for something or have faith in something, and it can actually be good for you. And let's define bad or good. Bad being unloving. So you can long for things that are unloving, and you can long for things that are loving, right? It just depends on the emotional state within yourself as to which one you'll be longing for at the time. So my feelings are, you need to be able to understand love and truth first before you can really know what is in harmony with love and truth and what is out of harmony with love and truth. Many of you are longing for things that are out of harmony with love and truth. Right? So an example of that. Many of you long for a partner, but it's out of harmony with love and truth, because you want the partner to fix a lot of the holes within yourself, sort of thing. That's the reason why you're longing for them. So it's not a real longing, it's really addictions. So how do you determine the difference between addictions and a true, pure, sincere longing for something? Well, that's going to require a lot of emotional sensitivity and honesty with yourself, isn't it? So I feel all of these things are going to help you firstly open up to the concept of love and the concept of truth, those four things that we've been talking about so far, right? So the faith issue, the truth issue, the action issue and the emotion issue are going to help you open up. But at the end of the day, it's only by the receiving of God's love that you'll be able to determine for yourself what is loving and what isn't. Right.
So I need to focus first. My highest priority would be focusing on learning to receive God's love.
Yes. And if you can receive God's love, then God's love will help you determine what is love and what isn't, what is loving and what is not.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Otherwise, you're driven by your addictive emotions as to determine what is loving and what isn't. So a lot of the things that you think are loving are not very loving at all. Right. And a lot of things you think are not loving are actually loving. So, for example, and just a simple example is one about addiction. Most of you believe that when somebody gives you satisfaction of an addiction, that they've loved you, right? And in reality, they haven't loved you, they've actually harmed you, right? From God's perspective, they've harmed you. From your perspective, they've loved you. That's because our definition of love is out. And this is the problem, is that we frequently desire things, use our will to desire things that are completely out of harmony with something that's good for us, actually. So the key is to be able to first receive some of God's love, then we can determine what is good and what is not. Does that make sense? What is good and what is bad.
Yes, thank you.
It's like I said in the first century, honestly, receive God's love, and everything else will be added to you. This is how you determine everything after that. It's hard when you begin, because when you begin, you've got the world's definition of love only. And remember, I did a whole series of talks about the world's definition of love. Remember I did that? And that was the purpose of those talks, were try to open you up to the fact that most of you have imbibed the world's definition of love, and so therefore find it very, very hard to listen to God's view of love. And in fact, what God knows is loving, you don't even think is loving. You think it's not loving. Right? So that is a problem. But let's focus on the issue of faith if we can. Can we do that? If we come down to Christine. And then maybe across to Phoebe on this side.
So when you've created doubts about how can God have a relationship with everyone in the universe?
Yep.
That's constructed as resistance?
No, I'd say firstly that is an interesting question. So that's a question. Yep. When you base your life on it, now it's a doubt. So to me, it's like, how can God have a relationship with everyone in the universe is a question. Like, questions can be answered, all of them, you follow? Now, but when I live my life by going, well, it's impossible for God to have a relationship with everyone in the universe, so it's what Dage is talking about, it's a bunch of crap, right? Now I'm living my life by that doubt. There's a big difference between those two states, right? One is a question that could be answered. Another is living your life as if you already know the answer to that question. You follow? So with a question like that, like how can God have a connection with all these different people at the same time, I look at it quite simply in that I can have a relationship with, I'm finite, and I can have a relationship with 100 people, different types of relationship with 100 people. So if I'm just a finite being, can have a relationship with 100 people, why wouldn't God, who's infinite, be able to have a relationship with millions of people? It makes no sense to me that he wouldn't be able to. But then I also see the example in what men's created. So you've heard of like things like a mini computer. You've heard of that, right? A computer. Well, what does a computer do? You have a computer, like a fairly big computer, and then you might have like thousands of people connected to this computer. And we make these devices where thousands of people can all work at their full speed on one computer. Right? Now, if we can make a device that can serve thousands of people at the same time, then surely it would make sense that God could be a device that can serve millions of people at the same time. Makes sense, doesn't it, logically? So with the question that you asked, there is an answer, but when we ask questions, we need to ask questions like a child would ask a question. How does a child ask the question? What do you think, Christine?
Simply?
Well, it'll ask that question, but would it already be going, no, I don't believe the answer? Or would it
open?
Be open to receiving an answer that's logical and makes sense, wouldn't it? Yeah. How do most adults ask questions?
The opposite.
The opposite, yeah. We're not even interested in the answer. In fact, we're making a statement when we ask questions many times. Many of you have done that with me, actually, where you ask a question, but really you make a statement. Like, the question might be, how can God serve millions of people at the same time? That might be the question. But the statement is, I don't believe God can serve millions of people at the same time. You'd be better at saying that. Does that make sense? And then we can discuss why you don't believe it, right? Which is a different discussion than whether it's possible, you see? And this is the problem, is that because of our predisposition towards a lack of faith, what we have a tendency to do is to make out we already know the answers to questions, because knowing the answer to that question in the negative precludes us from ever having to act upon it, right? Whereas a child doesn't do that. A child listens to the answer of the question, and if it's logical and makes sense and it joins the dots together for them, then the child builds upon that particular question with other questions generally, and is quite satisfied with the response, and even will build its life around the response. Right? But we don't do that as adults because we're cynical and full of doubt, and we like to have no faith. And why do we like to have no faith? So we don't have to act. Yeah. So the question is a good question. Don't get confused between questions and already thinking you know the answers to the questions and making statements. All right. So what I see happening a lot is that people are really all they're doing is making a whole heap of personal statements when they ask a question. They're just making a whole heap of personal statements of what they believe, and they're formulating them into the question. Right? So I get that a lot about me personally. Like, people say, do you really think you're Jesus, or do you really, or don't you think that it's possible that you could be influenced by a spirit, or don't you think it's this, they're not really asking a question. They don't believe in Jesus, and they're trying to come up with a valid reason inside of themselves as to why they believe that's true. Does that make sense? So this is frequently done by many people on all sorts of subjects. Like, you've got to be careful of that. When you ask questions, you want to be open to answers. You want to be able to analyse them, and you want to be able to logically dissect them, and you want to be able to feel about them without having all of your own unhealed emotions get in the way. Right? And this is the problem, is that with faith, we're often letting all of our emotions get in the way. and therefore not even listening to any truth as a result, and not having any faith as a result. Yeah. Which is the whole purpose for doing it. Yep. Does that answer your question sufficiently? Yes or no is the answer to that question. If we come down to Glenn, Phoebe was next. So go.
So I sort of feel like I've got a small bit of faith in God as being good.
Yep.
And I've always attributed my lack of progress, or when I long for God's love, and I don't receive it, it feels like it's my lack of faith in myself, and I attribute it to, like, I just feel it's my worth, and I feel so crappy that why would God want to love me? But maybe am I just deluding myself?
Yep.
Is that because are they my actual beliefs about God?
No, you need to look at where this lack of worth came from. You don't want to feel the pain of where it came from. So you'd rather tell yourself that you just have a lack of worth, when the reality is you've just been attacked. And that's why you feel bad about yourself. You feel that it's your fault you've been attacked.
So it's perpetuating.
So you're perpetuating a falsehood by saying, I'm unworthy, I'm unworthy, I'm unworthy. What is God's truth about that? I'm worthy, I'm worthy. I'm the pinnacle of God's creation, right? I'm worthy. That's God's truth. Your truth is, so your fear is, I'm unworthy.
God would never want to love me.
Yeah. Why? Where did that fear come from? It's got to have come from somewhere. You haven't had the interaction with God, so it has to come from somewhere else.
Yeah, my parents.
Yeah. So how did they treat you in such a manner that you now believe you're unworthy? What did they do?
They didn't love me when I needed to be loved, I feel.
Yeah, but there must have been things they did that attacked your worth.
Yeah.
Does it make sense?
Yeah.
That pulled you down as a person, and that's why you're now in this cycle. So, and you don't want to feel about that. You follow?
Yes.
You don't want to feel about that. So you've got to be careful here. It's like, if you have faith in God in this situation, you would believe that I'm worthy. You would, even though you know emotionally believe it yet, you'd know that's God's truth. I have faith in God's truth, in God's goodness, that God believes I'm worthy. In fact, if you think about it logically, it's impossible for God to create anything that's not worthy, right? From a logical perspective. So I must be worthy, even though I don't feel I am. Stop telling yourself that you are unworthy and crying about being unworthy, and start looking at why you feel unworthy. And that's all to do with how you've been treated by a number of people, but mostly family of origin, right? Don't get caught up in attributing what's happened in the family of origin to God and your faith in God. You see? Whenever you tell yourself unworthy, that's what you're doing. Whenever you say, I'm unworthy, you're actually attributing to God something that actually came from your family of origin. And that's not going to build faith, that's going to tear it down. You believe God is the same as your family of origin. And God's not. God's not going to attack you. God already believes you're worthy. In fact, it's impossible for God to create anything that's not. So that's God's perspective, and you're resisting God's perspective. And why do you resist God's perspective? Because you don't want to feel
the pain
of getting attacked when you're young, you see.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Yep, thank you.
Makes sense?
Yeah.
Go back to Josh, but we're over in Glen here.
Oh, you will be answering the same question.
Oh, okay. It's the same question, was it? Good on you. Yeah, no worries. So, Josh?
Do you still have doubts
Do I have doubts? About what?
in your progression?
I have doubts about myself, certainly. Yep.
And when does doubt cease? Is that just when you're at one with God?
Yep. So yeah, I certainly have doubts in my personal abilities. Certainly, I don't have as many doubts in God's abilities. And this is what's pulled me through many, many things. So even it's pulled me through the experience of emotion, because there are times when I feel like my emotions are so intense that it's pretty hard to even address them. But I know that if with God everything's possible. So my faith in God and the fact that with God all things are possible means that I can deal with my emotions as long as I have God's help. You follow me? So then I stop relying on myself so much, and I rely on the fact of God's goodness, and I rely on the fact of God's nature and character. You follow? And that's what gets me through many things, even though I personally still have doubts and still have worth issues and so forth to work my way through.
Makes sense, yep.
Yep. And this is where faith comes in, you see. Faith can pull you through many, many things. It's a beautiful quality because it sort of grabs you, puts you in the future, or allows you to imagine the future, and it pulls you through any trauma or tribulation or whatever it is that you're facing, suffering that you're facing now. It can pull you through it and out the other end. That's what I love about the quality of faith. There's no other quality that can do that, right? It's only faith that can do that. And so to me, faith is an extremely important quality, and I've had a lot of it in my life because I can see the necessity of it. And not only that, to me, it's a logical quality. You know, like you have faith all day, every day with physical things, and all I do is apply the same the principles to my emotions and spiritual life as what you do to your physical life. Mm. Yep.
Thanks for that.
If we go across to Kelly and then down. What's your name? It's all right. What was your name? Jennifer, that's right. So down to there afterwards. Kelly.
If we haven't developed emotional faith, which we haven't, so our willpower has, and how am I going to...
When you say you haven't developed it, you've developed it in some things, haven't you?
Yeah,
just
so
not in God and not in...
Yes, so that's been an intellectual faith. Is there such a thing as intellectual faith is my question. Because
not really, no.
What if we didn't have emotional faith, then what has got us to coming to believe that we can change and grow?
Because you have some emotional faith.
Right, okay.
So it's not like you're devoid of it.
Right.
You follow me?
Yes, okay.
But you are choosing to remain like in a state where you don't want to get more.
Uh-huh.
Purposefully doing so.
Right.
And we've got to examine the motivations we have for purposefully doing that. You follow?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's not like all of you are devoid of faith completely, because you're not. You wouldn't even be here if you weren't.
Yeah.
Right? But the reality is you are choosing to remain in a lack of faith in order to avoid a whole heap of action, truth and emotion.
Continuing.
And that's a choice. You need to see that as a free will choice. Does that make sense?
Are we rebellious about... Is that a rebellious action to not want to choose?
Yeah, it is a rebellion. But see, anger drives... There's a lot of reasons. Fear drives us. Anger drives us. It depends what God we have, fear or anger or whatever emotion is it's the emotion that we prevent the most that becomes our God. You follow? So if shame is your most emotion you prevent the most, then that becomes your God. If fear is the emotion you prevent the most, then that becomes your God. So it's the emotion that we prevent the most becomes our God, and when we have a God other than our real God, our real creator, what we have a tendency to do then is put that particular thing first. So in your case, in your history, preventing fear has been your great, and fear related to shame is in particular your greatest emotion. So that's become your God. And you're learning to change that. You haven't changed it yet, but you're learning to change it. So that's really good. The key is stop using the justifications, the false beliefs, to justify the lack of faith in God, and allow yourself to instead see that these false beliefs are actually just there to support your lack of faith in God, and you could choose to have a different belief if you wanted to, without even having to process too many emotions. There's an emotional imperative in most of us to deny the process of emotional pain. That's the emotional imperative. We desire that the most. And we've got to change that.
Thank you.
And it was Jennifer.
This is more about clarity, and I probably have the answer to the question already, and it relates to something you said before. In the middle of the night, I woke up, I decided I wanted to know what was behind the doubt. And I related to to everything had to be tangible, and if I received anything, I would run the other way, etc. I went into all the pain, or some of the pain that I experienced as a kid, and the lack of trust. No one was there, etc., etc.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt that pain for about 2.5 hours. And I guess what I've done is I've had faith. I've allowed the emotion to be there.
Mm-hmm.
I've allowed truth to be shown to me, and I put it all into action.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So what's the question? So be careful of the stories, Jennifer.
It was a clarity.
So what's the question, though?
That sounds like what I've done, yes? No.
So you want reassurance.
Oh,
This is your addiction,
back to
right?
doubt again.
You want reassurance. Why do you want reassurance?
I might lack faith in myself.
You want me, a male, to tell you that, yes, you're right. Why do you want that? There's obviously a group of emotions there, isn't there, that you want...
Well, I never got it from Dad.
You never got it from Dad, so...
I didn't get it from Dad.
Okay, so there's a start.
I didn't get it from school. I didn't get it from Mum. I didn't get it anywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. So you've got to be careful of these things, Jennifer, because these are the kind of things that really waylay you. It's the addictions involved. You know, a person who's truly wanting to experience their emotions feels their addictions. Your question is totally driven by addiction.
Okay.
It's not a question. It was a statement you were trying to make, and then you were trying to get approval from me for it. And that is an example of you not addressing that particular emotion. You follow me? You're in desperate need for somebody to just give you the approval.
Okay.
Right? That's not a question either.
Right.
Right? And so you had no intention of asking a question. So I'm not attacking you. You just had no intention of asking a question because this addiction need to be fed. This addiction of, I did this process, now I want to know whether that's right. Right? So there's an addiction of wanting to be right, and you want to hear from a male that you were right, and so what can I do? If I love you, what can I do?
Affirm. Sorry. Oh, no. In God's truth, right?
Well, yeah, ironically,
No,
your first
feed.
answer is more what you feel.
You don't feed it.
Exactly,
Yeah.
but your first answer is more what you feel.
Yeah, okay.
You do want a male to affirm that's the addiction, you see?
Yep.
You do want that. So it's good to acknowledge that, and that's an addiction. So therefore, that's going to prevent you from having faith in God, and it's going to prevent you from accepting truth.
Okay.
Because you want the addiction met.
Okay.
Have a male affirm that what I did was the right thing. Have a male affirm that I didn't make a mistake. And what if I had said, no, that's not right? What would you have done?
I would have been confused.
Correct. You'd go straight into doubt because you want, and that's not what we're talking about here. You can tell me that I'm wrong, and if I've got a connection with God and I've got real faith and I know I went through a process and I believe that I went through that process and I know I have, you're not going to be able to tell me that I'm wrong.
Yeah.
But I can tell you are. Right? That's a problem, right?
Yeah.
That's a big problem. Because that means that somebody comes along, tells you you're wrong, and you'll go and do something else.
Yeah.
Right? Can you see that?
If
somebody who you believe in a state of authority tells you that you're wrong, you'll be tempted to believe that you were wrong. With this emotion.
Yeah.
This is the problem with that addiction.
I put too much faith in authority.
What you're doing is you're not trusting your own experience, and you want affirmation from another person that your own experience was valid. Now, what I would do under those circumstances is trust that God will tell me that this experience was either valid or invalid.
Yep.
God will tell me.
Yes.
Right? I don't need you to tell me.
Yep.
God will show me. When my belief is false, God will show me. You follow me?
Yes, I do.
And all I've got to do is be open to that.
Okay.
So rather than you being fixed on getting the validation from a person, you want to be fixed on getting the validation from God, don't you?
Yes.
Because He's the one who's educating you.
Yes.
Yep. You've got to take a lot of care doing what you've just done, because it's a very damaging thing to your relationship with God. Because it means that you're basically a will-o'-the-wisp. You know what I mean by that? You get pushed here and there by the wind, and whoever blows the hardest is where you're going to go. Isn't that a sort of a sum total of your life?
That has been a very large part of my... I've had to learn to trust myself, and I didn't trust that.
No.
Yeah.
So you've still got that problem, so we need to work your way through that. Does it make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay, well, that's our half hour on faith.